Welcome to the Climate Hive show. What do you solve? Where we sit down with global game changers on climate. My name is Kevin Drolet, aka Kedro. I'm here with my co-founder and co-host Mike Higgins, aka Higo. And today we are traveling to Nairobi, Kenya, and we are sitting down with Andy Onyango, and he is the co-founder of Zen Carbon, and we are going to learn all about what the amazing things they are doing with cement. So, really quick on Andy, his journey into the space came after an early focus converting captured CO2 into synthetic fuels until he and a co-founder with construction management experience realized that embedding CO2 into the concrete could permanently store carbon and strength in the material. So they're solving many problems. So welcome to the show, Andy. And I'm going to turn it over to my good man, Higo, to kick us off.
Andy, great to have you. Really excited to be talking today. We're going to talk about your approach, your technology, those things, but we like to start one step back, which is really around the inspiration. There was a time before Zen Carbon, and now obviously Zen Carbon's out there, and you guys are working hard. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that journey that got you and your partners into this and motivated you to the point where you formed a company to do something about it?
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Yeah, so our journey basically starts at uni. Uh, Living in Africa and specifically in Kenya, I guess climate change is a topic you have to contend with from the very get-go. This is something you are sort of used to as you grow up, considering most of the country has sort of an agricultural base as a means of economic income, or basically that's how people generate income. So climate change is nothing new to us. I grew up hearing my parents saying, in the days of our grandparents, we will plant basically in August, March, and some sort of months. Reason being is they could predict the rain and weather patterns. Now, growing up myself, that's a thing of the past. Rain is scarce and unpredictable. So you can guess how that affects an agricultural livelihood or household. So growing up, we sort of had these challenges at the back of our mind. But it's a uni that basically, takes us to the next level of, well, yeah, I've been through the system. I've been through my primary education, been through my secondary education. I'm now at university. So what have I learned through the years that can help me sort of bring some relief, be it to my parents or be it to other people out there suffering from the same consequences or impacts of climate change. I think globally there's this notion that, let's try to do this so by the year 2030, by the year 2050, we avoid these impacts. But I think right here at home, we are actually feeling those impacts of climate change already. To give you context, just late last year, Kenya came from a 5-year drought, probably one of the worst in its history. So you can guess how such things are embedded in the community and generally in such innovators as myself. So yeah, we get into uni, we sort of start digging into, climate change, what causes climate change, impacts, what Kenya has to offer in terms of either mitigation and adaptation. And I think that's where I meet they are my best friends at the time, not even co-founders. They are my two best friends. We ended up being co-founders. So that's when we started figuring out how can we do this and help this, and this is the outcome we want. So our research led us down to, singling it down to carbon emissions as one of the biggest contributors to climate change among the GHG gases. So we figured, let's try doing something with these carbon emissions. That led us to synthetic fuels and eventually led us to concrete, which led us to Zen Carbon.
So let's give the people watching the show an idea of what Zen Carbon is and what you do. So why don't you, at a very high level, like what's your approach? What are you doing to, impact cement, and what's that overall process look like?
I think I'd have to take you back. I'd like by stating the fact that concrete accounts for roughly 7 to 8% of all global CO2 emissions. I think this has been widely repeated. But then again, concrete is also the second most used material on Earth, only behind water. So I think that speaks volumes into the problem. So the thing with concrete and emissions, primarily this is driven by cement. So the production of Portland cement is an energy-intensive process with two main sources of CO2 emissions. One comes from the calcination of limestone, that is calcium carbonate, which produces clinker, which is the primary component of cement. The other comes from the fossil fuel combustion, which happens in the kiln of these cement factories. So these are the two processes that produce CO2 in cement production. So on average, 1 kilogram of Portland cement releases approximately 0.9 kilograms of CO2 into the atmosphere. So as I stated, given that concrete is the second most consumed material globally, this roughly equates to the 7 to 8% I mentioned. So at Zen Carbon, we are primarily tackling this 7 to 8% of global emissions, and specifically in the cement. So the way we are doing this is we are sort of coming up with a technology which is hinged on a process called carbon mineralization. This is where we inject captured CO2 directly into fresh concrete during the mixing process. So the process itself is called mineralization, or some excerpts refer to it as carbonation. So the primary cement phases involved in this mineralization process is tricalcium silicate, dicalcium silicate, and calcium hydroxide. So the injected CO2 in the presence of water combines with the calcium compounds in the three sort of components I just mentioned to form calcium carbonate. But the trick is in how the calcium carbonate is formed. It's formed at the nanoscale. So this is important, especially when we now go into the actual process of how this mineralization helps us in sort of storing the CO2 permanently into the concrete. This happens through accelerated hydration, which is where the calcium carbonate, as I mentioned, is formed at a nanoscale. It acts as nucleation sites for the formation of a gel called CHH gel. CHH gel is basically what gives cement and concrete itself its strength. So, and it acts as the primary binding ingredient in concrete. So the accelerated hydration caused by us injecting the CO2 produces more CSH gel. The other is the CO2 we are adding acts as a filler effect and improves concrete particle packing. Basically, this means we are forming a denser material. And finally, there's increased compressive strength and durability. And the two things I just mentioned, the accelerated hydration and the filler effect, which is increasing its density. So that's basically a general overview of how the process or technology works. But then, as with any technology, you go into the lab with a hypothesis. Injecting CO2, we wanted to store it permanently. We figured out the processes that make the CO2 to be stored permanently. But then you realized the CO2 is making the concrete denser. In that when you view this under a microscope, under a scanning electron microscope, you see normal concrete have a bit of spaces in between them. But the ones we've injected are closely packed. So this was a direct correlation to our claim of injecting CO2 increases the strength. So we figured if strength is increasing and cement is the primary component involved in strength, giving concrete its strength, why not try reducing the cement content while increasing the injection of the CO2? So in the end, you have sort of a double process where we are storing CO2 permanently into the concrete, and you're reducing the cement content, furthering the embodied carbon reduction inside the concrete mix. So in the process, it's sort of a double-edged sword, reducing emissions, and by reducing the cement, also the cost of the building material decreases. So yeah, I think those are the key realizations we came to as we started building up the technology at the start.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, you have sort of like a win-win-win, right? Like in what your team has developed that's very interesting. You're lowering cost, you're capturing CO2, and you're creating stronger cement essentially and concrete. Which seems like very advantageous because you're using less materials, right? Like in order to build. It's your process creates less materials. I was wondering, when I was doing the research on the company and sort of this, and I'm glad you brought up like the 7 to 8% in terms of global emissions, because part of that is in the creation, as you're speaking about. So, as I understand it, like, and I think I learned it from you originally, but like that cement pulls in CO2, you're increasing the speed of that. But the creation of concrete, uh, it also creates CO2 because of the processes that have to happen. So there's sort of like it's it's crazy. It's like the second most used outside of water. I actually didn't know that. I thought it'd be some like steel or something, but that's amazing. And but can you talk about like just your understanding of like what you're solving from offsetting, like drawing down this carbon to the process, that the 7 to 8% where it comes from. Like I guess what I want to understand is like what's the balance? What's the balance? Because even the process of making
Yeah, so basically we are targeting, I'd say, more of the downstream effects of the concrete production process. Going back to what you were saying, uh, our process isn't something new or novel. Buildings naturally absorb CO2 during their lifetime. So over a 70-year period, your building will be absorbing CO2, though in very small quantities and at a very, very slow process. So that's why we figured if concrete can absorb CO2, why not try accelerate this process? So we figured targeting the production itself downstream will be way better, considering there are people already innovating on the upstream effects of this. There are so many startups out here coming up with blended cements, all sort of alternatives to cement. So we figured let's sort of solve for the downstream effect of that, which is the cement eventually goes into concrete. So that's why we landed into concrete rather than solving for the upstream effects of it.
that makes sense. What's do you know percentage wise, what's the increase in the amount of CO2 that you're pulling in, or does that depend on what you're injecting? Like the absorption.
Yeah, so roughly we can do, depending on the mix, there are a lot of factors that go into this, but depending on the mix design, we can do roughly 400 grams of CO2 for every meter cubed of concrete we produce, or any producer who uses our technology does. So at scale, maybe just mentioning at a gram level, it seems quite small, but at scale, this sort of extrapolates to the tons and tons of CO2 that are sequestered through our technology.
Hmm. Does the this process of injecting the CO2, does it change the pliability of the finished product at all? Because there's a whole supply chain, right? Getting it to a job site and then pouring it. Is concrete still concrete? Same density, same weight, same pliability, same maneuverability. Does it change at all the aspect of the of wet, concrete that has to be formed and, shaped?
Yeah, so the concrete is still concrete. It still remains as the concrete that people use as in short, there's nothing changing in its application.
Okay.
It's still the concrete that is used daily. Uh, Only difference is there's some sort of increased properties. For example, there's a decrease in setting time. Setting time is basically right now, if you have a drum and have concrete in it, the time it takes to harden, that's called setting time. So the CO2 decreases the setting time, meaning CO2 mineralized concrete can be transported for longer distances.
I was thinking it was the other direction when you said that it's set up faster, but you're saying it sets up slower.
Well, we've covered some of the science of what you're doing, and obviously you and your team are very smart and like really thinking this through. Can you talk a little bit about just the company and like the business, and you're starting in Kenya with your business, and what are some of the headwinds you face, like getting things going? What's the receptiveness to it, and what's that been like?
Yeah, so the reason for setting up in Kenya actually was something strategic. In the process of whatever we are doing, there's a lot of carbon accounting involved. For example, you just can't claim I've stored this amount of CO2 inside the concrete. You actually have to prove that. So there's a bunch of things that go into the actual reactors we're building and a bunch of analytical tests that go into the product we've produced after. But before that, there's the primary ingredient, which is the CO2. So the reason why Kenya is specifically and strategically important in our case is Kenya, through its abundance of renewable energy. Kenya is probably one of the, I don't know if it's only or one of, but Kenya has a 90% renewable energy grid. So by virtue of that, Kenya is sort of home to sort of these energy intensive industries, one of them being direct air capture. So Kenya is steadily growing into a direct air capture hub. We have direct air capture companies setting base in Kenya. And for us, that provides a source of carbon neutral CO2, which is very key in our process. We have to get CO2 that is carbon neutral. What that means is we can't go to that sort of manufacturer of CO2 who does it in the lab. The CO2 itself has to be carbon neutral. So this limits our CO2 sources from either direct air capture sources or a biogenic CO2 source. Biogenic CO2 source refers to anyone who burns biomass in their process and in turn releases CO2. So these are the two key areas of us getting the CO2. So in terms of our business, Kenya sort of gives us that edge through the direct air capture industry I just mentioned. We inject that into the concrete. In terms of the business, we are primarily a technology manufacturer. We sort of manufacture the technology that does the injection, and then the technology is retrofitted to concrete plants. The reason for that is we are targeting scale. As I mentioned, currently in our current process, we can do 400 grams of CO2 per meter cubed. But picture a concrete plant doing, say, an average production of 1,200 meter cubed of concrete a day. So you have to extrapolate that 1,200 to 500 meter cubed, and that gives you the tonnage necessary in terms of sequestration a day. So it's us getting CO2, us manufacturing the technology going to the concrete plant. In terms of how the CO2 gets to them, I think with every concrete plant we get in touch, we sort of model their production volumes and how much CO2 they need. So we have sort of storage tanks on site. So the CO2 tank is taken on site. And so basically, if it's a month, 2 months, whatever the plant feels comfortable, because also this is tied to the emissions, the CO2, the transport in between, the emissions has to be accounted for. So I guess that's the sort of value chain it goes through.
And then what's the business? So you're a technology manufacturer, and then you're selling the technology to other companies to leverage. Is that sort of what does the forecast look for you for, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years?
So currently, we are targeting to do some trials within the year. So the plan is to sort of scale across the concrete plants across the country, then probably figure out how we can get it to other areas outside sort of Kenya. So in terms of a focus, the sort of model we are going it is we're licensing it per ton of meter cubed concrete produced. So as I mentioned, if a plant has 1,200 meter cubed of concrete, then this is produced through our technology. So we charge a fee for every sort of meter cubed of concrete produced through our technology. So that sort of depends with the type of plant. So the focus sort of varies with each plant we model against. But yeah, I can say it kind of looks promising because As I mentioned, there's that aspect of cement reduction. So for the plant, aside from the emission angle and producing low carbon concrete, it's also hinged on the reducing of cost of production long term for the plant. So I think that was some sort of the bigger incentive at play for these plants to adopt the technology.
Yeah, I think that's a clear incentive for sure. What kind of partnerships or collaborations have you guys been able to build so far? Like, I don't really understand the supply chain of, of this product. Like, are you finding receptivity to your idea and your approach? Are you excited about, some companies that have come forward that you're doing business with or that are assisting you to, do this heavy lift? Is it too early for that?
Yeah, we've had a ton of help on that end. Maybe to give more context, once the technology is licensed and retrofitted to a concrete plant, the concrete plant produces the concrete and sells it to people.
Hmm.
So even before talking to the concrete plants, we sort of wanted to test the demand because the concrete plants will have to sell it to someone. So in major cases, the concrete goes to developers, either residential, commercial, or industrial developers. Then the developers, usually the people who do contracting of sort of the supply materials are contractors. So we've spoken to contractors, we've spoken to developers. Then we added an extra layer of even these buildings that are going to be built by these developers have to be designed by somebody. And do these people doing the designing of buildings have the sort of sustainability aspect in mind? And if they do, what are their current approaches to that? So that means talking to certain professionals. You have architects, you have structural engineers, urban planners, so forth, so on. But in our major case, in terms of sort of gauging the demand of low carbon concrete in the country, we targeted mostly developers and contractors because those are the sort of large consumers of concrete which comes from sort of the plants themselves. So it
Right.
sort of spoke to these people, sort of see their approach, see their sort of challenges, sort of what they think about whatever we are offering. And it sort of drew up a list, sort of worked on some, still working on some. But in the end, I can say the reception was good, considering ours is sort of, I'd call it a plug and play mechanism. It's sort of you're just buying a building material as you would have normally had. You don't have to hire sort of 10 architects to sort of redesign your building to fit sort of a green infrastructure. So
And you guys want to stay in the technology side, so not necessarily creating machinery, or you want to license technology to people that will do that. Like, I know Kevin touched on it, but I just want to make sure I understand it. Like, where will you guys sit? Are you developers of technology that you'll license to people that will, ultimately develop the mechanism of doing this work, or do you guys want to bring it all the way through yourselves?
uh, I think as a founder, we usually have this thing where you usually want to do everything yourself. But
Yeah.
then
Yes.
cons considering the mission we have as a company and the time period we've set for ourselves to achieve that sort of mission, going the sort of licensing the technology route helps us achieve that mission way faster and at scale.
Yeah.
So, meaning we can license the technology to someone or somewhere, or even a country I've never even been to, and our technology will still be at play, and we'll still be achieving our mission either way. So the goal is to stick to licensing the technology to any and every concrete plant or developer willing to sort of do the emission and cost reduction route.
That actually makes a ton of sense. It's funny. I keep on hearing like everything is a service, and I can't help but thinking like, yes, cement is a service. Like, who's thought of that before? Zen Carbons, cement is a service. But I think that's super smart because I mean, to be able to scale and grow, what you've come up with is a secret sauce, and your secret sauce is creating this, like less materials, cheaper, stronger cement that draws down CO2 faster. And for it to be used anywhere, that's very interesting. And the business model obviously matters a lot because that's the hard thing of wanting to do everything yourself. Unfortunately, it sometimes keeps you kind of small versus niching and being like really super focused on a plan. But I did have a question on so just on the carbon markets, Andy, like, so are you also entering into that space? Because that's a space, carbon markets, where, there's uh, are you also going to be in the carbon market space and selling credits as part of your business model, or not so much?
Um, I'd say it's something we are looking into as a business model. But maybe to give context into that, I think when initially started, that was sort of something we were actively looking into. But then we sort of did, I'd call it a survey of green products all around us. You have people doing cook stoves, you have people, picture anything green. So with most of these people, you sort of realize the product they're selling isn't sort of their primary, I'd call it revenue stream. Like it without the carbon credit revenue stream, the business would not work. So
Hmm.
it figured we didn't want our that to be our sole case. We wanted to have a product that would sell regardless of whether we had carbon credits in store or not. So whether it comes or not, that's an added bonus to us. Doesn't
Hmm.
change our business model per se, but it sort of gives us a boost. But yeah, considering where we get the CO2, as I mentioned, direct air capture and biogenic sources, I think carbon credits will come into play in the long run in terms of, say, subsidizing the cost at which we get the CO2 for the biogenic source or for the direct air capture partners whose sort of primary revenue stream is carbon credits. So it's more of the partners you're dealing with sort of have carbon credits embedded in their sort of revenue models. But as a company, it's not something we're looking into as a primary source of revenue.
No, that makes sense. I can totally see that as a cost
Smart.
offset downstream, for the people that are manufacturing the stuff. When do you think you'll be ready to start talking seriously to partners about licensing your technology and sort of what in your mind is left to do or to prove, at the Zen Carbon level to put you in a position to find and support partners?
Yeah, concrete is a really tough business, guys. We're looking at an industry that has gone sort of a millennia or even a century. Let's bring it down to a century. It has
Yeah.
gone to something rough of a century without any major innovation coming into place. Then you have these startups coming around all over the world saying they can do this, do this. It has no effect on your processes. So by default, there are a lot of skeptics. So our work is to convince these skeptics that whatever we are claiming is true. So before even getting to retrofit, you have to do extensive trials with a concrete partner. Say you identify the partner, they are willing to take a chance on the technology. So what you do is sort of set say a 6-month period of trials. So you do extensive trials, use their mixed designs, use the ad mixtures they do, sort of go to the field, see how that affects it. And specifically in Kenya, that is much more rigorous because there have been cases of building collapsing all around the country recently, and that has been a really key thing all across the news. So initially it was a sensitive matter, but now it has even gotten more sensitive. So first I'd say it's trials, then that's when we get to the retrofit. In terms of when we figure we'll get to the retrofits, we have a couple of trials set for late 2026. I think that will also influence our fundraising to that effect. But I'd say by early 2027 or mid 2027, we'll be having a couple of retrofits across the country. And hopefully that will be sort of the validation needed for others to follow suit in the low carbon concrete pursuits.
And so what for Zen Carbon, and by the way, I just wanted to say that I love the name Zen Carbon. It's I don't know how you all came up with that. I would love to know how you came up with Zen Carbon, but it's a good vibe, man. It's a good vibe, Zen Carbon. Uh but what are headwinds? What are headwinds for you right now? Like what keeps you up at night? What are the main challenges you're facing as you guys are developing this company?
Yeah, so before that, slight segue. So Zen Carbon. So as the name suggests, Zen, basically a chill person, blah, 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 and all that. But initially, we had thought of naming the company Zero Emissions Network, but we figured that was a mouthful. And also it didn't contain the sort of thing we were doing, which was carbon. So we figured Zen Carbon would work just
No,
perfectly.
I love it.
But
Zero emissions network is Zen. Yeah, Zen.
yeah,
Yeah.
so the things keeping us at night. As I mentioned, concrete is a really tough industry. There's a lot of regulations in place. As I mentioned, before getting a material, product, or anything of the sort that deals with a structural material, you have to go through a lot of processes, regulatory wise. So in our case, we are sort of bringing something new to the market. So there's a lot of regulatory hurdles and lobbying we have to do, especially on the lobbying bit, convincing people this new approach doesn't change anything basically to a normal concrete production process. We're just adding something extra to the process, and it's totally safe, totally compliant with whatever people are doing right now. So I think for us, it's a lot of lobbying going around, trying to get mineralization specifically into the Kenyan building codes. And I figure that is something, even as we scale to say other countries, that will have to be done. Fortunately for us, there are some countries who are making headway in that, Kenya being one of them. I think by virtue of climate change hitting us hard, government has sort of woken up to, policy sort of has to go hand in hand with rapid technology development. So I think for us, there's that sort of pace, early pace being set in the country. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think regulatory headwinds will always be a factor when you're ever talking about changing or improving a process.
You had mentioned at the beginning of our podcast here that Kenya has 90% renewable energy grid. And I wanted to just get a your take or your understanding of what it's like in Kenya from renewables. Is there, you're, I mean, you're very impressive in terms of your sort of grasp and understanding of this needs to happen and the things. I mean, I think Mike and I are both super impressed with what you're doing. Is there other like innovation happening? Is there like any kind of like a movement in Kenya amongst like young people or people that are innovating right now? Can you give us a sense of what that looks like?
Yeah. Uh, Back to the 90% renewable energy grid. By virtue of that, there's a lot of, or rather, let me take you slightly back. So we have that 90% renewable energy grid. The only problem is this is not beneficial to us, the citizens of the country. Uh, for that energy to be cheaply distributed to everyone, you sort of have to have industries that consume that energy for us to get it at a low cost. And I think that's what is lacking, having these energy intensive industries. So by virtue of that, I think there's a lot of carbon dioxide removal companies setting base. Zen Carbon being one of them. If I mention some of the direct air capture plants, Octavia Carbon, such kind of companies are sort of setting the pace for this. I'd call it using what you have locally first before looking externally.
Hmm.
So a local problem, a local solution solving a global problem. That's sort of the thing, sort of everyone is going about. Aside from carbon dioxide removal, I think the other thing is you have this sort of uh, social and environmental sort of awakening in the country. You have a lot of social and environmental startups coming up. By virtue of that 90% renewable energy grid, we can set up manufacturing locally. You have people producing sanitary pads from banana fibers. You have people recycling, say, battery waste. You have people, there's a lot of sort of circular economics going around. And I think
Hmm.
that is tied directly to that 90% renewable energy grid, because with power and energy, that equals to industry. So I think that is a big factor in sort of this local movement happening around.
Is there like innovation centers or incubation centers? Is the like government supporting these initiatives and innovations?
Yeah, so there are a lot of incubators around. Some I'd say better than others, but equally, if it's just equipping the innovator in terms of what to do, the basic process of have an idea, sort of get the prototype, test it with users, then fundraise to scale. There's a lot of that going around in terms of equipping sort of first-time founders like myself, but yeah, some better than others. I think the real thing is in financing, the financing bit. Because yes, you can equip me with all that. I have the idea. I've gone from idea to prototype to testing with users. Now I need to scale that up. Uh, Unless I have something that has been pre-purchased, sort of uh, massively. I have pre-purchases in the order of the thousands and millions of dollars. I'd need to fundraise to get this product to scale. So the issue is really in the fundraising. I think that is sort of lacking. And in some cases where there is, it's not really tailored to the continent itself. It's
Hmm.
sort of mirroring the Silicon Valley model. But you sort of figure in Africa, that model doesn't specifically work 100% of the time.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's the fundraising bit actually.
Man, I like that idea of, solve locally but have global implications. That's it's a great, way to frame it.
Were there any questions that you would like us to ask you?
There's something, it's not more of a question, but something I'd also like to be put out
Hmm.
is sort of we're still in the early days either way, but sort of early on, sort of something we were, sort of roadblocks we were facing from the fundraising angle. Sort of in Africa, most of our capital comes from, the global north. So the skepticism we were facing initially was most of the funders we were approaching didn't quite believe deep tech could come from Africa.
Right.
Uh, and I think most of them were pointing at it from a sort of talent perspective. If I take Zen Carbon's POV, most of the team we have right now are sort of university graduates. And I think that speaks volumes to whatever we've achieved till now. A bunch of university graduates developing technology that by its nature is complex, but by nature of having the distribution networks becomes even more complex. And they're sort of doing it at the scale we are doing it and at the efficiency we are doing it. I think that speaks volumes to the talent pool we have as a company and as a country. And I think that's something that I think that's a notion going around that Africa isn't that fully equipped in terms of deep tech specifically. You know, uh, when you picture Africa, you picture what I mentioned, banana fibers to this. But when it comes to building technology, we are sort of not given that fast nod, especially on the fundraising bit. And I think companies like Zen Carbon exist to dispel this nature or whatever backward expectations there are right now. So I think that's something I failed to mention in terms of what we are endowed with in abundance as a country. Renewable energy and a local capacity and talent willing to innovate and bring sort of developments and new technologies to life.
Yeah, I think it's a super important point that you bring up. There is absolutely, bias that exists in the funding. There's, I've definitely, heard it and stuff that people have these biases and don't see, there's brilliant people all over the world, like yourselves and your team, that are coming up with solutions. Just the fact is that their resources might not all be there, or the structure to get those resources. And certainly, there's a lot of companies that get funded that go that go nowhere, and don't contribute anything, and big checks are stroked to them. So I think this is an extremely important point. We actually we work with a group out of Bangladesh in partnership, Climate Innovation Challenge, and they work with PhD and master's students who are then, from the global south that are doing work in climate. And so part of Climate Hive, is that we want to bridge that conversation, global north and global south. We have to break that down because, as you're saying, like you're experiencing firsthand in Kenya the effects of climate. It's probably not, in the same way as acutely felt in, the global north, although, certainly it is for farmers everywhere on the planet, and others. Um, but I think it's super important what you're saying. There's bridges that have to be, knocked down, and, amazing ideas can come from it anywhere, of course, and I'm glad there's people like yourself, that you're going for this, and we certainly want to support you in your mission, and get the word out about what you're doing, and help you make sure you get your pilots and your testing and the funding that you need so that one day we'll be building buildings here in the US with some Zen Carbon. That'd be awesome. How cool would that be?
Some sequestered CO2.
Yeah, different parts.
I
Yeah,
think
and
that
I think that's really something I give my deepest gratitude to. Basically just getting the message out that, yeah, in as much as we have this problem, there are these solution givers to the problems we are facing, and not only sort of hinged or sort of clustered in this side of the world, but this is a global problem that has a common solution, and the solution is being sort of tested and being made and developed in Kenya. So I think climate science really plays a part in that, and yeah, I'd say thank you for having me on board.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show. Um,
Andy, what a conversation. We've enjoyed it. We've learned so much, and for the parts that I could understand, even learn more. Zen Carbon is a Kenyan startup pioneering mineralization, CO2 mineralization in the process of developing cement. As they say on their website, we believe the built environment can be more than just infrastructure. It can be a climate solution. And I think that this conversation has made that very clear. And we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Maybe next time you're in Kenya, we'd be happy to have you guys visit our facility and probably see the tech firsthand.
I would love to. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, sure thing.
Yeah, fantastic.